So welcome back, everybody. It's just gone 1:15. I see a few faces popping up on the screen, so hoping everybody's finding their way back with a fresh cup of tea and ready for this final session. So as I mentioned before the break, this session is really kind of over to you in a way. This is about exploring whether we have an appetite to extend our commitments beyond the pledges of the declaration, which might be around setting carbon targets, being more selective about the projects we take on, championing biodiversity, specific actions around knowledge sharing or upskilling. Could be any of these things. We're not. No one's planning to revise the declaration, I don't think, to extend the pledges beyond what we've all signed up to. But we would like you, as organisations, as individuals, to consider what specific areas and actions you might focus on over the coming year as a result of the conversations today. And we're going to allow you to explore that through a number of breakout rooms, smaller scale discussions in breakout rooms. And we might, we're then going to collate the sort of output from those discussions, and we might find some strong alignment of opinion about, where we need to focus. And if so, that's great. We could try and generate an action list that the majority of us aim to follow, but we might not get that alignment. That's okay too. We can all focus on doing our own thing that's most relevant to each of us. But let's see where we get to. So in a minute, we'll spirit you away into your virtual breakout rooms, and each group conversation will have a facilitator, and you'll be posting your ideas onto a Miro board, and hopefully a link to the Miro board will end up in the chat very shortly. So please try and log into that. If you're struggling to get into the Miro board, I know some of us have difficulty with that, then don't worry. As long as your facilitator can get into the Miro board, then you can see, he or she will share their screen, you can see what's going on and share your views, and someone else will post them on the board for you. So one way or another, we can capture what you want captured. But before we do that, and before we start those conversations, we just wanted to share a couple more things with you, really just to sort of as food for thought and sort of seed those discussions. Firstly, we wanted to share the results of a recent survey that was sent out to all signatories of the Built Environment declarations. And secondly, we wanted to share the headlines of the recent roundtable discussion that Will alluded to earlier around setting carbon targets on projects. But Mike, if I can hand over to you to give a summary of the survey, that would be great.
Thank you very much, Ed. Great session so far, and I hope we can keep up the energy levels. I've just got a few slides to share, because I think we all agreed it would be a good idea to share the responses from this survey that was carried out. This was carried out just recently, in the last month or so, by Built Environment Declares, and it went to every one of those disciplines, that full rows of disciplines that I spoke to you about under the UK Built Environment umbrella. And we had responses across the board, disproportionately, I'm very pleased to say, coming from structural engineers and engineers in general, starting to almost rival the architects, certainly when you add up all the engineers we do, in their responses. And these will have gone to whoever is the signatory in your firm for responding. They may have passed it out for responding to. And it asked a whole range of about 20 questions that we took a little while to think about. And I just wanted to highlight back to you what's coming out. There were 3 areas of questioning, and I've highlighting 2 responses in each of those 3 areas. The first area was about practices and strengthening your commitments and strengthening action. And if you look at the strongly agree, somewhat agree, the blue and the orange added up, you can see the strength of agreement. And the small slice, generally speaking, red, which is no comment, don't know. I'm not quite sure what that means, and the leader of a company, but I suppose they didn't want to make a mistake. So the commitment of practices in the UK across all the disciplines around signing up to Race to Zero. That's the kind of government is keen for all companies to do that in the lead up to COP, against science-based targets. So this is about businesses committing to reduce carbon of their business. From our point of view, it needs to extend into the zero carbon of their projects. But this is a commitment in the business. And also, second one, practices making an explicit shift in their missions and goals to prioritize planetary health and human well-being. And I thought it was worth bringing these sorts of things up because this goes further than carbon. It's easy as structural engineers, especially in practice, nitty-gritty of everyday projects, to be thinking so much about carbon, and it is important. It's something we can shift now, but practices committing to think much more about planetary health as a whole and the impact of our work as a whole on human well-being. Very, very, very strong agreement that this must happen. Then we looked into demands for changes in regulation, because we really do understand that we can't do it all alone. And couple here, very clear. To be honest, they were all strong agreements. Whole life carbon calculations and targets being mandatory at planning stage. Perhaps a little bit of discussion around planning stage regulations, or is it building regulation stage? But making them a factor in determining whether a project is given planning permission even. Very, very strong consent for that. Small slice of disagreement. And we also had, because we were multidisciplinary, we were looking at other impacts, such as the greening factor, which is in city developments, how much green space is created. Not everyone necessarily getting on board that one because they weren't necessarily, didn't necessarily understand what it was, but still very strong agreement that we need to think beyond carbon into other environmental human well-being factors. And then the third area that we were asking questions about was about legislation and policy change. So it is interesting that earlier in session one, big word that came out in the middle was legislation. I think there's a growing recognition that we cannot do this without government support. We don't want to say we can't do anything without government support, but in the end, there's important stuff for the government to do. So it was quite interesting to see. I noticed it came through today, and I hadn't spotted it until the tea break, that the government has just issued a major report, 366 page report, which sets out their plans. I'm just looking for the title in case there's a few who haven't spotted it. Their net zero strategy, Build Back Greener, I suppose it's inevitable, seems to have just come out. And I was trying to read it in the tea break, but it's got a lot of stuff that doesn't help us a lot, but it's very important, I think, that the government has and is moving more and more in our direction and beginning to realize that they cannot leave things to market forces, that legislation is needed. So very strong agreement in the survey on carbon tax. There's lots of debate to be had about exactly what that means, but helping accelerate the shift because it has to happen fast. And even going as far, very strong support on a Future Generations Act, this idea that decisions made now need to be made on behalf of future generations, not just the now. That is quite substantial. So I think I think that's the real message I wanted to get, that we can afford and need to afford to think big. This is our time now. The survey results are going to go and be discussed at the Built Environment Summit, which has already been given a plug at the end of October. And then it hence will be taken into COP26. So really important that we as an industry get our voice heard at those levels. And so thinking in your businesses as how you might influence that to get that debate is going to be important in the overall rapid accelerating reduction of the harm and improvement of the good that our industry can do. Right, I'll hand you back now to Ed.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. That's fantastic. Think broad and think big. I mean, I'm I did promise to give some headlines from the embodied carbon targets roundtable. I'm going to do that now. I sort of feel I'd almost like to go into the panel discussion on your message, Michael, thinking broad and big. So everybody, please hold that in your minds as I narrow us back down to carbon just for 2 minutes. But then we'll go into those broader discussions again. But let me just share this as I promised I would. So I'll rattle through this very quickly. Hopefully you can see a white slide here. So yes, we held just a week or so ago, there was a round table with a cross section of about 15 firms from across the profession discussing why have carbon targets, are they helpful, what are the barriers to setting them, what are the barriers to meeting them, and these are just some of the things that came out of that discussion. So a general sort of consensus that targets were really positive in terms of driving change and as a means to really pull people's heads into the wind and think on every project about, gosh, okay, what are we going to do here, and as a means to measure progress. But a recognition that there were all sorts of barriers to being successful here, both external and internal, and the external barriers were around consistency of measuring and benchmark data on which to base targets. Certainly a feeling that carrying out those calculations to achieve that benchmark data and measuring had a cost, and that delivering lower carbon solutions sometimes had a cost, and that if unless there was a level playing field, that there was a concern about losing competitive edge within the market, and a strong feeling that this legislation was an important piece that was required to kind of level the market and force change across all projects. We've talked about over design already today, and conservatism within codes as a challenge. But also internal barriers around range of project types. Firms that do lots of one-off projects might find it much harder to benchmark data and set reliable targets. Lack of resource, again around actually people carrying out those calculations, but also an internal barrier seemed to be about not being involved early enough to influence the big picture decisions. The kind of, will we knock the building down or build a new one, or retain, do we build a basement or no basement? Sometimes we get to the table too late to influence. But I think we saw from the Menti poll at the start this afternoon that actually on the whole we feel we have most people feel they have a reasonable influence on in terms of clients and perhaps some of those big picture decisions. This was again a kind of taste test of the sample of the firms in the room during that discussion around status of where people were in terms of setting targets. I think this pie chart looks pretty similar to the donut from our Menti poll earlier, with the vast majority setting targets and measuring carbon in some fashion or other. So some consistency there. And a range of sort of typical pledges around measurement, reporting, setting targets, but also on an individual project basis, but also on a portfolio-wide basis, and also pledges around pushing for leaner design and upskilling as well. So all of these familiar themes that we've seen already today that might feed into your discussions. But as I say, these pledges are really only about carbon, and what we want this next discussion to be is much broader than just carbon. So I'm going to kind of echo Mike's mantra of thinking broad and thinking big as we go into this next discussion. So I think we will now be spiriting you all the way into your breakout rooms. We have about half an hour for this discussion, so we're going to bring you all back in together at about 5 o'clock, and we're going to try and make some sense of what you've produced. Wow, okay, fantastic. Well, whilst you've all been scribing away there, Will and I have been kind of hovering and snooping on you, trying to sort of pick up common themes. And as always with these conversations, I'm sure that the half hour we gave you wasn't long enough, and it went very quickly. But there's an awful lot of stuff that you've managed to generate within the time. So thank you for your proactive engagement with this discussion. I think what we're going to try and do now is we're not going to ask you as individual groups to kind of report back one by one, but I think Will's going to share his screen, and we're just going to scroll down the Miro board and try to just do some live affinity clustering of the actions that you've generated to try and pick up the top handful of themes that are coming out of your discussions. How does that sound, Will?
Yeah, let's get started. So hopefully you can all see my screen. So breakout rooms 1 and 2 first. Breakout room 1, we've got Letty, upskilling, carbon standard practice. I noticed that happened quite a lot elsewhere as well, so I'm going to make that bigger still because I think that's going to come out as we go through. Tools and guidance, sharing, communicating. That's all quite similar again, isn't it? Let's make those a bit bigger too. Breakout room 2. Exemplar projects. I like that one. I assume the stars are the big ones. And use this emerging trend of carbon as a catalyst for showing the value of a structural engineer. I like that a lot. I think Mike alluded to that earlier, that we've maybe found a bit more of a voice over this topic. Whole life cycle thinking, so that students are prepared. Yes, good idea. And getting information knowledge out of the office onto the tools, tackling fragmentation. So good ideas there. Carbon. Okay. Breakout room 3. I guess we've just gone in purple. So if that's all right, I'm just going to put these over on the side. Committing time. It's all resources, pick up elsewhere as well. Helping others. So again, this is about upskilling, I guess. Make it simple and tell the stories of clients. So that kind of goes with trend of carbon catalyst value of engineers. So let's we'll remember those go together. We'll try and do something afterwards, by the way, where we get all these big ones and group them even more concisely. CTAL's still editing, but I assume this is the most important one. That's a big green one. So clear and concise records. Very good. Goals, targets, resource and fees. So again, there's a bit there about enabling people to do this stuff. There's a bit on carbon and targets comes up a couple of times in there. I assume the records is this is about, dear future engineer. This is about enabling other people to pick this stuff up on later down the line. I quite like that. It's a good one. Breakout room 5. By the way, if you're a scribe and you're listening and you're worried that you haven't made things big enough in time, if you're still in the room, feel free to keep making things bigger so it's a bit easier for me when I get there. Money and time to do the work. So again, a bit on committing time to this. That's interesting. A lot of that coming out now about people realizing this needs to be more than just volunteer time and budget. More informed. Good. Carbon measurements are standard over there. I think that's come up a few times again. Yeah, and again, and collaboration. So again, speaking across the industry. Breakout room 7, I'm going to assume it's the ones here in this square. Carbon at each stage. Good. Targets, like that. Pressure on big players to go harder on saving carbon and be an example. So yeah, really good. So again, these two here are both sort of communication pieces, aren't they? And trying to advocate for others to do better too. Targets for buildings in the industry. I was hoping you'd put this one on the right, but I'm just gonna overrule and put it over there anyway. I think be bold is a good post-it note we should all have stuck above our desk all the time anyway. Information and fee proposals on low carbon principles, good. Diverse members onto boards, that's an interesting one. I'd like to hear more from whoever wrote that down afterwards. The target to always beat your previous project, committing to continuous carbon reduction. Yeah, so a bit more around targets again. I'm going to make these just a bit bigger still so we can see them from this sort of scale. But how are we doing for time? 3.5 minutes, not bad. Okay, breakout room 9, client awareness. So big communication piece again. Internal targets and effective reporting. So again about targets and again around counting carbon. Legislation, Part Z, and record keeping. So again, dear future engineer. It's come up a couple of times now, hasn't it? Like that. Engaging with wider teams. Embedding carbon calculating as part of standard systems. How to inspire all engineers to look for ways to be innovative in ways that do more good. So this is about not just doing less harm, but doing more good. Presumably the idea here, that's the year 2022 is the year of doing that. I like that very much, Mike. Thank you for that. Okay, Jess's room. Discussing with clients at the beginning of the project, same with the site. So again, another big communication piece. Reporting on carbon throughout, making sustainability business as usual. So again, sort of normalizing this practice. We've had 2 years of upskilling. Now let's try and normalize. Educating clients, collaborators, more sustainability decisions. So this is another good communication piece. Support ISRT in legislation. This is another part Z piece. And engagement with others. So again, a communication piece. I like those a lot. So I'm sure you've all done great jobs of arranging these things very nicely in a row. Okay, all of these are big. Oh, yeah, okay, it's the ones with the stars. Training, good. Proactive monitoring of carbon throughout, sharing information throughout, and case studies. So another one on case studies, echoing room 2 there. So this is mostly around normalizing carbon, sharing, and then some case studies, which again is sort of sharing, isn't it? Breakout room 14, nearly there, then I could breathe. Did not read the questions. That's okay, as long as this is useful. Ultimate materials we use last far longer, not 50, but 500. So there's a bit about end of life reuse. Benchmarking, okay, so yeah, it sounds like the discussion here is slightly different, but these are still really interesting comments. Should we be designing in concrete like that? More important how we get at carbon in the future. So again, dear future engineer. So quite a few posting notes kicking around sort of planning for the future. Oh, and that's it. There's nobody in breakout rooms 15 and 16. So hopefully that was useful. Ed, should I grab? I'll grab those big ones now, take a copy onto the right and try and cluster them whilst you're doing the next bit.
You can do.
Let's try.
I mean, I was trying to sort of do my own clustering in my head whilst you were scrolling through, and I sort of challenged myself to try and boil it down to 3 themes, if you like, if not 3 key actions, and if I, which is impossible, of course, but in trying to do that, I came away with normalizing as one, so measuring, benchmark, targets, exemplar projects just being business as usual, communicating as a second, around influencing and raising awareness, and then enabling as a third, and whether that's enabling through resource and fees and legislation and so on for today, or enabling future generations by what we design today. So normalizing, communicating, and enabling were my 3 takeaways from that, if I was to kind of try and generalize. But interested, Mike, I'd be interested in your thoughts if Mike Cook is still on the line.
Yeah, I'm still here. Head is spinning. I liked your getting down to 3 words was pretty impressive. I think normalize is a good word. I think in the sort of first stage, we've got to all be working to a kind of normalized behavior. Structural engineers worry about carbon, they track it, they understand it, they talk about it with collaborators, i.e. architects, etc., and clients. So we normalize, carbon and ideally beyond carbon into our projects. Then, a business which has a level of commitment in itself. So the first is almost about everybody can do it. And then in terms of a business, they need to make very clear commitments. You talked about enabling, but to enable better behavior, the companies need to make these commitments. The race to zero commitment, time and resource commitments, teaching and training commitments. I use the word commitment under 2. Normalize, make commitments as businesses, and then it's about speaking out. And I think the fundamental thing, I like that person who put in, you need younger people on the board. I don't know who that was. And I think if you could get businesses, I mean, this is being too idealistic, I know, but never mind, to focus more on future benefits. It's about future generations. Having younger people on the board means you're more likely to be thinking about future generations, not just about, you know, this year's profit levels. I know you can't ignore them, but so there's something much bigger about future benefits to society. And out of that, I think comes you've got a message to say. You need to speak out with that message, and you need to get things to change. But it's changing because you are strongly committed to that other way of seeing things, that future benefits way of seeing things, and that leads on to legislation and stuff. So that could be speaking out. That could be, you know, enabling. I think speaking out. That's where I got. I didn't get down to 3 words.
That's great, Mike. A lot of kind of common, a lot of overlap there, I think. And Will, how are you getting on? Do you want to? Can I give you the last word here based on your clustering?
Well, only to say that I think that I am managing to cluster them into those 3 sort of topics. So I think we're sort of on track there. If I just put it back up, you can see I'm not quite done yet. If I sort of followed you right, normalizing, engaging, and enabling. Oh, engaging is also speaking up, and enabling is also commitments. Yeah, no, it seems like 3 good strands.
And I guess it's fair to say, Ed, you know, depending on the scale of your operation and where you are in the journey, as they call it, you know, you will be putting more energy into one or the other. But I would argue that it's important that the biggest firms make the biggest shifts, because that's where the biggest benefit and harm can happen. But there's a lot of you know, the real need for change across the board, whatever scale you're operating at. And I think if we believe that the market is changing and we see the rate of change, I mean, I say this summit has shown me, you know, you think about how far people have got in 2 years, how far they've got in the detail of what they're doing and their understanding of why they're doing it. You know, another 2 years, so much will shift. It makes good business sense to be at the crest of the wave and not left behind. So it's good business sense to be getting on top of this, whatever scale of business.
Absolutely, I totally agree. I think if we look back to the conversations we were having 2 years ago, or even last year, that things have moved on a terrific amount, as you say, not just in our own thinking, but in the broader industry and amongst our clients and in general, which has changed the landscape. Great. Maybe I can suggest that we will try and tidy this up afterwards and send a 1-pager back around to everybody that will do our best to try and capture the mood of the room, the virtual room, in a concise set of themes that we can share back around. So look, I think we're approaching the end of the session, really. Thank you everyone for your proactive participation today and for attending. I hope that you leave with renewed determination and hopefully an intention to adopt some specific actions around these themes that we've been discussing. But most of all, I hope you've got something out of the discussions and learned something from each other. And I think sharing our challenges and successes and ideas is what this is really all about, to come together as a sort of set of declared firms, as a professional community, to work together to try and you know, move things forward as a collective. I've certainly been inspired by everything that I've heard today. So that's all I wanted to say. Just a kind of final plug for the iStruct's panel discussion at COP and the REBA Built Environment Summit on the 28th and 29th of October as 2 events coming up that we mentioned right at the beginning of the afternoon. Please you know, try and join those as well if you can. That's it from me. Mike, I don't know if you wanted to say any final words for the day.
I think you've done a great job, Ed, and you've summarized it really well. No, I mean, support your institution. You know, it needs you to talk to it. Will needs you to help him, you know, get out, publish, print in the journal and so on. Join in the panels and committees. You know, just give it whatever encouragement and help you can. That's always important. The institution has been a great supporter of structural engineers declare. Without it, we wouldn't have nearly as much visibility. And do look for the report, even if you don't go to the Built Environment Summit in 28th, 29th, do look for the report. It's called Built for the Environment. You can easily find it online. Also, when you go online and look for the report, it'll ask you to sign up that you, I forget the word they use, but that you support the report. And you'll find in it a lot more of the sorts of statements about change that's needed. The ones that I spoke to you about on the questionnaire. And yeah, so there's plenty to be getting on with. And thank you very much, like Ed says, you know, for taking part in this. And I hope it has shown you that around us now, there is an industry that is really on the move.
Thank you, Mike. And I wanted to finish by saying thank you, of course, also to all of our speakers who joined us and presented today. A really fantastic range of perspectives there. And if you'd like to catch up with our speakers or just with each other, then as I said earlier, then there will be at least 1 or 2 chat rooms left open just now. I'm not quite sure how we join them. I'm sure that'll become clear in a second. If you want to stay on, then you're very welcome to do so. But for the rest of you, thank you again, and have a great evening or rest of your day. Thank you for joining.